Sandy says read, and welcome to the channel. You guys, today's review and discussion is going to be a little heavy. The subject matter of the book that I'm bringing to you is a little dark and heavy, so I want to start out a little lighter. I want to start on a little more positive, happy, fluffy note before we dive into this heavy stuff. The book that we're going to be reviewing is The True Story of Hansel and Gretel, a novel of war and survival. And this is by Louise Murphy. This, get the book up there for you to see. I know there's a lot of glare going on because I have a lot of extra light happening today. It's a thing. We need a lot of light to discuss this book, you guys. Okay, it was dark, it was heavy, it was deep. I'm going to give you guys warnings before I go into the really deep, heavy stuff. But before we begin that, let's do something a little bit light, fluffy. I want to welcome you guys to subscribe to the channel because here at Sandy Says Read, we do bookish stuff, book reviews, even when they're a little deep and heavy. We do all kinds of book reviews here. We do booktube tags and all sorts of bookish things. And we also, once in a while, talk about birds and music. It's a plethora of things. One of the bird things I bring to you guys sometimes is weird, silly antics from my birds. I have pet parrots who live with me here in my home, and a couple of my birds, all of my birds are spoiled. Okay, they are spoiled. They have special treats that they like, and they like their treats to be presented in a certain way. My birds like to eat pistachios, most of them, and all of them like to have their pistachios with big openings so that when they crack the pistachio and get the nut out of the middle of it, it is easy for them to do. They are spoiled. They like for things to be easy. This particular nut right here, let me see if you can see that. There we go. Can you see how that has a really small slit? Okay. This pistachio has been rejected. I am showing it to you because it has been rejected. It has been thrown from the play gym, thrown from the perch. And when I gave it back to Winston, my eclectus parrot, he threw it again. He was not going to open this pistachio. He's not going to crack this particular nut because the slit is too small. He has refused it. So this particular nut is going out into the yard for the birds outside. Yeah, that's the fun, frivolous thing I have for you guys today. All right. Also, I want to welcome you guys to please subscribe to my newsletter. You will see the little ticker going across the bottom of the screen. My email newsletter also has weird, wacky news of the parrot variety once a month. On the first of the month, every month, I send out the Sandy Says Read e-newsletter with fun, frivolous things in it and news about books and stuff that are coming up. There's also a column by a dragon. Usually Malachi has a column in there for you guys. There you go. Okay, so the fun and the frivolous and the like advertising stuff is over. We're going to dive into the book review now. Usually when we're doing book reviews here on the Sandy Says Read channel, I invite you to follow along with the Sandy Says Read bingo card. You can get this at the Bingo Baker website. I'll put a link to that in the drop-down box below so you can follow along. You can generate your own Bingo Baker card. I don't know if I'm going to be saying all of the fun, fabulous phrases that appear in the Sandy Says Read bingo card today. We might not be doing that because, like I warned you, this one is just a little bit heavier and darker than usual. But you can generate that bingo card for yourselves if you want to, okay? You guys, it is up to you. Okay, we're going to dive into this. I wanted to, for 2025, I wanted to do another challenge that I was making up on my own, another reading challenge, and that is the Fractured Fairy Tale Reading Challenge. I have a set of books on the TBR shelf in the other room that are fractured fairy tales. Oh, I should have written down all the titles so I could share that with you guys. Perhaps after we get through this video, I'll make another video of the variety of fractured fairy tales that are on the shelf, and then you guys can join in on that reading challenge with me. I think that would be fun and cool and wonderful. One of the stories that I put on that shelf was The True Story of Hansel and Gretel. I knew this one was going to be a little darker than others. I knew it going into it. I didn't know just how dark it was going to be. Oh my goodness. Let's dive into that now and talk about it. The specs. The specs are, this is a novel of war and survival. It's by Louise Murphy. It's by Penguin Books, copyrighted in 2003. The publisher is Penguin Books, and it was copyrighted in 2003. So it has been a hot minute since this was published. I'm going to be giving all of the spoilers. We're going to be talking about a variety of things in the book. I will be giving spoilers, and I will be telling you before some of these spoilers are horrifying, so that if you feel uncomfortable, you can mute the video for a few minutes. You know, here on the channel, when things are too spoilery or whatever, I hold up the hashtag sign to let you know to mute. And when the sign goes down, you can unmute. I will be doing that for you. Or if things are just too uncomfortable, you certainly can just turn away from the video and come back for another video another day for perhaps a cheerier book review. Okay, let's see. This was written in third-person point of view, past tense, which I very much appreciated and was thankful for. Very thankful for. And we do get the point of view of multiple characters. We're not in just one character's point of view throughout the entire narrative. And I also was thankful for that. I enjoyed seeing, so much, but I liked seeing the story develop through different characters' eyes. So that was nice. It's 297 pages. And let's do the back cover. Read the back cover for you guys. A poignant and suspenseful retelling of a famous fairy tale set in a war-torn world. In the last months of the Nazi occupation of Poland, 2 children are left by their father and stepmother to find safety in a dense forest. Because their real names will reveal their Jewishness, they are renamed Hansel and Gretel. They wander in the woods until they are taken in by Magda, an eccentric and stubborn old woman called Witch by the nearby villagers. Magda is determined to save them, even as a German officer arrives in the village with his own plans for the children. Yeah, it's that horrible. Okay, now there's a publisher's note inside here that I want to read for you also on the copyright page. The publisher's note is, in this novel, Louise Murphy uses the art of fiction to cast new light on the horrifying facts of the Holocaust. It was a publisher's note, and at the very back of the book, we do have an interview with the author. There are a set of questions after the story where an interviewer is asking Louise questions, of course, as you would in an interview, right? And I think that one of these questions in particular will help us really understand what we're about to dive into with this review and discussion. Okay, question number 7, the interviewer asks, "You certainly do not flinch from depicting acts of true horror, and characters like the Oberfuhrer seem to typify the Nazi as an incarnation of evil. With other characters, including some of the Polish citizens and Major Frankel in particular, you step away from such absolute characteristics and tread more in the realm of psychological ambiguity. Guilty though these characters are, you make them human beings. Was this difficult, especially when writing about such an iconic and horrific event?" And Louise answers this question saying, "I honestly do not understand the psychotic desire to control, torture, and kill that the Oberfuhrer represents. And he was the most difficult character to portray. I experimented with humanizing him, but it was like saying that, after all, Hitler loved his dogs. No humanizing can explain and forgive such evil. Men like the Oberfuhrer appear when historical events give them permission to use this dark side of the human imagination. Major Frankel is a very different type. He is a man in a dirty war who began as a patriot. He is every soldier, a normal man caught up in the dehumanizing action that war demands." Okay. All right, so let me dive in to what I have for you. I did not prepare a Sandy synopsis of the book. I didn't really put together like my overarching thoughts of this beforehand. I might give you that at the end of this review and discussion. I mean, just suffice it to say, this was a dark book for me to read and get through. I was just so disturbed by the horrors that were inflicted upon children in this book. I mean, it's hard to have, I mean, it's hard to see horrors inflicted upon anyone in story, in fiction, and know that it's based upon reality, and know that it was based upon something that really happened. And let me just get political for a minute and say it's hard to see something like this, read something like this, and know it's based upon truth. It's based upon a real thing that happened in the past, and know that there are hostages being held in a place in our world right now. As of this filming, they're being held in a place in our world right now, and it's being replayed again. There are people in Gaza who allow this horror and atrocity to happen again. And I hate that. I hate that that is real. I hate that that is happening. And I hate that as I was reading this book, I knew that was happening. And the things that happen in this book, while they are fiction, while it is a fictionalized story, it is a retelling of, it's a reimagining of things that happened. I still hated the fact that reality is happening for people who were taken from their homes and people who were abducted. That reality is happening for people as of this filming, and I wish to God that it wasn't. Okay, I'll stop being political now, and we'll just talk about books, okay? All right, so in this story, we have, hang on, let me look at my notes for you guys. In this story, we have a retelling or a reimagining of the story of Hansel and Gretel. Okay, now in the fairy tale, we're told about, Hansel and Gretel who go into the woods and they leave a trail of breadcrumbs so that they can find their way back home, right? And they run into a witch who lives in the woods, and that witch takes them into her home, and she manipulates them. She betrays them. She fools them and tricks them to get into her oven. That's the story of Hansel and Gretel. We all know that fairy tale, right? So in this story, what Louise has done is she has taken some of those elements of the fairy tale we were told as kids, and she's reworked some of those elements. One of the elements she has reworked is the breadcrumb trail. So let's look at pages 7 and 8, where we see this breadcrumb trail. This is at the very beginning of the story. This is the very beginning where we have a man, and we're going to call him the mechanic throughout the story. He's going to be called the mechanic. We don't get his real name. There is a man, and he has a wife, and she is called the stepmother. We never get her real name. She's just called the stepmother. And the group that she falls into, they call her the White Wolf. Okay, we never get her real name. And then we have the two kids. They are all on a motorcycle. They're on a motorcycle and the little sidecar of the motorcycle. And these two kids, there's a girl, she's maybe 10 or 12. And I don't remember if we ever got her actual age, okay? But her name is going to become Gretel. And we have the little boy. He's maybe 7 or 8. He's a little bit younger than her, okay? And his name is going to become Hansel. We never hear their real names. These 4 people, they're like the main players in our story. And we never get to hear their real names because they are Jewish. And in this world, they have to hide. And they have to hide their identity, and they have to hide who they are. And we never get to, Louise never tells us their real names. Never. And I love that aspect of the storytelling. And I thought that was a very clever thing. Anyway, we have them at the very beginning of this story running from Nazis. They are on a motorcycle trying to get away from these 3 Nazi soldiers who are also on motorcycles. And because there are 4 of them, it is too heavy, and the motorcycle is not going to go fast enough. So they make the decision to go around a bend and stop and get the children off and the children go into a ditch and they hide so that the two parents, the mechanic and the stepmother, can get away, and the Nazis will follow them. They are the diversion so the children can hide and then go off into the woods. And when they go off into the woods, Hansel and Gretel, as they are now named, they use the breadcrumb trail. Here it is. Hansel, he was making a great decision. He had some in his pocket, but it would mean breaking the most sacred law. You never touched the last piece of bread until everything had been done. The swallowing of spit, the fist in the gut, forcing yourself to feel the stomach pain as if it belonged to someone else standing beside you. Father had taught him how to do these things. Only when the pain gave up could you touch the last piece of bread. Gretel said it was the law. You had to eat it slowly, not gobble it. It was how they did it. He didn't know why. He took the piece of bread out and measured it with his eyes. His father had stolen it from a pile that had been forgotten in the burning and killing. Like all the ghetto bread, there was a dark mark where the metal rods that pressed into the bread while it baked left lines. There had to be lines on the bread so it could be divided evenly. Both children leaned toward the bread until their noses almost touched the hard lump. They stared at it with the gaze of connoisseurs. It was slightly larger than the piece that Hansel usually managed to save. He looked at Gretel appraisingly. She might forbid it, but it was his right. No one could take it from you, even if they were sick or starving or hungrier than you. The stepmother had taught them. Your bread was your bread. He pinched off a tiny piece and deliberately let his fingers open so the bread fell to the leaves under their feet. Gretel's eyes widened, the hunger tore through her, and her hand twitched, but she did not grab the bread from Hansel. He picked off another piece and threw it back toward the road. Why? Her mouth grew wetter as she thought of going back, finding the breadcrumb, holding it in her mouth. If we leave bread, they can find us. Later. He began walking into the dark, and every 10 steps, he dropped another crumb. The leaves will cover it up. Stepmother can find a crumb on the street in the middle of bodies thrown out in the morning. She'll smell it. Gretel nodded. The stepmother always found crumbs, pressed them into a flat pancake with water, and divided it meticulously among the 4 of them. It was true. She'll find the bread. Gretel couldn't really believe it. It would be too hard to find in the leaves. The stepmother was used to concrete pavement where crumbs lay naked. But the law was the law. It was his bread. No one else could eat it, and if he chose to waste it, she guessed it was his right, although no person had ever done that as long as she could remember. So this is how Louise worked in the breadcrumb trail. Is him, Hansel, now his name is Hansel, dropping little breadcrumbs as they move into the forest, running away, hiding from the Nazis on the motorcycles. There we go. And bread comes in again because when they get to Magda's house in like a little clearing area in the forest, there's bread on a post. And Hansel is like, oh my God, there's bread. And he grabs it and he starts eating it. And Magda comes out and she's like, hey, that was for the birds. And the 2 kids are like, you're just giving bread to the birds? You know, and Magda, she's considered a witch by the people in the village. And so she has a reason behind this. You know, giving to the birds is like having hope, knowing that tomorrow we'll all still be here. So there are some really nice messages like woven into this otherwise very dark book. And because Hansel has eaten the bread, Magda's like, okay, now you have to do some chores for me. And so she gives these children a chance to work at her home. She gives them a chance to do something constructive so that she kind of has an excuse to take them in, which I also thought was very nice. Okay, there's also, we do have a cage in the house. At one point, Gretel becomes very sick. And so to keep her from like thrashing around and falling off of her platform, they put her in a cage. So there's a cage. Of course, we have the witch, Magda. She's considered a witch. There are birds that come into play. The birds aren't necessarily eating the breadcrumbs that the kids have left behind, but there are birds throughout the story that factor in and help lead people. Yeah, because the birds factor in. And then, of course, the oven. There is an oven in Magda's house. It is huge. She was gifted this oven, and I forget now how the bakery came into play. was probably destroyed by the Nazis, right? But they are in Poland. The story takes place in Poland, and some Germans have set up an outpost in this Polish village, and Magda lives outside of the village in the forest, and somehow this huge oven was gifted to her. So she's got this huge oven in her house. It's enormous. It used to be in like a bakery, so lots of things were baked in it at the same time, therefore it is huge, and it's in her house. But the oven comes into play on pages 236 to 238. And this is going to give us a feel for Louise's style as I read this to you as well. Because we just, in the very beginning, we were kind of seeing the setup of the story and the breadcrumb trail. But here we're going to see not just Louise's style, but we're going to see how she works like suspense and downright terror into her story. So pages 236 to 238, we have, obviously we're nearing the end of the story, the end of the narrative. There's a lot happening. The Oberfuhrer is coming to Magda's house. He himself is coming from the village to Magda's house. Some Germans have been murdered, and he is on the warpath to find all the family members of the person who did it. There is a person who has committed the murder. Everyone knows who did it. The man turned himself in, and now the Oberfuhrer is on the warpath to find every family member and person connected to that murderer and basically eradicate them. He's on the warpath. Right. The sun was up now, and Hansel kept wringing his hands as he tried to make Magda move more quickly. She was dressed, and he hoped it wasn't too late. The fire had died out in the firebox. Only coals were left. The oven door stood ajar. The sleeping platform was stripped of blankets. The wooden bowls were gone from the table. The pegs on the wall were empty. Hansel looked around at the bare hut. Hurry, Magda. Please, just come on. And then Magda stopped what she was doing with the basket. She turned and stared at Hansel, and he heard it too. Voices, speaking in German. Magda thought she would faint. Her heart beat so unsteadily she had to gasp for air. Looking out the partly cracked door, Magda saw them coming through the trees. German soldiers, the SS officer with them. It was only a little after 8, but they had come already. She looked at the floorboards where she had hidden her food, but she had taken the boards up. They lay loose on the floor. There wasn't time for the children to crawl down and then replace all the boards perfectly. She looked desperately around the hut. Hansel had not been dreaming. Her mind moved in jerks, and she couldn't think what to do. She stared at Hansel, who wrung his hands over and over. The boy suddenly leaped toward the oven. He opened the door and stared at Magda. It can hold both of you. Quick, my darlings, do what I say. Inside, both of you, curl up. It's hot, Gretel frowned. It's hot, but you can do this. Magda took off her coat and put it on the oven's floor. Get in, lie still, and for God's sake, whatever you hear, don't make a noise. But you, Magda, where will you hide? Hush, my little boy, obey me. I won't go without you. Magda slapped his cheek so gently it was like a kiss. Obey me, boy. Gretel climbed inside. The boy followed her, giving a single dry sob, and they curled up in tight balls. Don't move an inch, Hansel. If the door latches shut, you can't open it from inside. It's hot. I can't breathe, Gretel began. Silence. Magda's voice was harsh. Hansel wanted to put his hand over Gretel's mouth, but he couldn't reach her. The metal was hot, and he tried to keep his back from pressing on it. The fire was out, but the metal still burned his back. He bit his lip hard so he wouldn't scream. The door banged open. Take her, the Oberfuhrer shouted. The soldiers grabbed Magda. One of them went to the boards lifted from the floor. He lay on his belly and looked under the hut. Where are the children? The Oberfuhrer spoke such thickly accented Polish, but his voice was so choked with rage that Magda couldn't understand at first. Their mother came a week ago. She took them with her. She's trying to stay in front of the Russians. Magda looked him in the eye as she spoke. The lie was her death sentence. She knew it, but it didn't matter anymore. The truth or a lie, they'd both kill her. You witch! You knew what your brother was planning, didn't you? The Oberfuhrer slapped Magda. One of the soldiers threw a board, and it hit the oven with a hard clang. Magda stared. The oven door had latched shut. Okay, so there's where the piece about the oven and the children in the oven comes into Louise's story. And you feel the tension and the suspense just build and build and build. I mean, obviously, the Germans have just come into this Polish woman's home and they're going to arrest her. They're probably going to murder her and kill her, right? They're after the children. It is tense. It is suspenseful, but she gets them into the oven. So you think, all right, good, they're going to be safe. And then it latches. And she's just told them, you can't get out if it latches. I mean, there's so much tension and suspense that Louise is building in this. It's very well done. I mean, this book is very well written, even though there is a darkness and just a despair and just so much hopelessness and death and horror throughout this thing. There is so much, war and hatefulness depicted in this book. It is well written. It left me feeling despair because it was so well written. It is well done. I mean, if you want something deep and heavy, I can recommend this book to you. Now, I am going to talk about a couple of things now. And so I'm going to put the sign up for you. I'm going to talk about a couple of things that are just horrible and they involve children. So if that is, yeah, and I'm not even going to put the sign up. I'm just going to tell you, if that is too much for you, please turn away from this video now. We've talked quite a bit about the book. It is one that I can recommend if you can handle that kind of darkness and despair, then I can recommend The True Story of Hansel and Gretel. It is very much an adult level book. I would not recommend this to teens, to young adults, even though I think that young adults can and should learn about the Holocaust and the horrible things that happened there. There are some subjects in this book that I think are a little bit too much for a young adult to handle. And we're about to talk about a couple of those now. Okay, so if that's too much for you, I invite you to turn away now. Thumbs up for a very well-written book and a fractured fairy tale so far. I welcome you to subscribe to the channel. And for those of you who are going to power through the rest of this with me, here we go. All right. There is a character in the book named Telek, and he is a Polish man who is a strong character. He loves a young woman in the book named Nelka. Nelka, that's her name. Nelka is this beautiful young woman who comes to Magda's house. They are related. I don't know if Magda is her aunt or a cousin, but they are related. All right. And Nelka is just wonderful in helping with these two orphan children who have come to her, right? She is wonderful in helping get them cleaned up, in helping guide them, in helping hide them. Okay, she helps with this. Nelka is pregnant. Her husband has gone off to the war. They don't expect him to come back. They assume he has died in the war. And he probably has. So many people from this village have died. When the Germans, when the soldier Frankel came to this village, he did kill many people in the village. And those bodies have been buried nearby, near the village, okay? When the Oberfuhrer comes to the village during the story, he is told, okay, these bodies have to be dug up and burned. They must be destroyed in such a manner that when the Russian army comes in, they don't find any bodies. We don't want any evidence of what the Germans and the Nazis have done. They don't want any evidence of it. They don't want anyone to be able to document how bad the Nazis have been. So the bodies have to be burned completely. Anyone who is killed or harmed has to be taken away from the village before the Russians arrive. Okay, so there's a deadline. There's a ticking time. There's a clock ticking, okay? But Nelka, she is pregnant and she does have her child, and Telek just loves her and he loves this child now, and he adopts her and this child to be his family now, and he's taking care of them. When the Oberfuhrer comes and wants to find among the village pristine children, the Oberfuhrer sees this new child as a pristine child that he wants to take with him back to Germany. He's looking at these Polish children as the future of Germany. He sees them, some of them, as being perfect. Okay, he sees their blue eyes and their blonde hair and their perfect skin and their, their hands and feet, they are without blemish. And he wants to take the children who are without blemish back to Germany with him and use them to create a master race. These are the Nazis, okay? So he wants to take Nelka's little child. Well, Telek is basically voted in the village to be the man, to be the person who will maim and harm these perfect children so that the Oberfuhrer will no longer want them. And we do see, Luis shows us in the book what he does to these kids to make them no longer attractive to the Oberfuhrer. And I'm not going to tell you what all he does. It involves like burning their hands on stoves. Okay, that's one of the calmer ones. All right, but terrible things happen to these to protect them from the Nazis. And I hated it. I hated it. It was very well written, but I hated it. And Telek goes through just a horrible psychological pain because of what he does and what he has to do to protect these kids. It was awful. It was awful. It was awful. Then we also have the sexual assault of a child in a glen. Not just the Nazis are the bad guys in this story. There is a Polish man in the village who is so angry at what has happened to his village. He's so angry at the Jewish people. He believes that if it wasn't for the Jewish people, then the Nazis would not have come to Poland. If it wasn't for the Jewish people seeking refuge, then this Officer Frankel would not have come to the village. Officer Frankel would not have killed so many people. The bodies wouldn't have to be burned. This Oberfuhrer wouldn't have come here. This Oberfuhrer wouldn't be trying to take children away. We wouldn't have to maim these children. This man blames the Jewish people. So when the Russian army is on its way in, when things are coming to a head, this man is like, I am going to kill every Jewish person I can find. I'm going to hurt and harm and kill every Jewish person I can. And so there's a crisis point where he is trying to kill a Jewish person that we're rooting for. And it's horrible. It's awful. This man has been so screwed in the head that he thinks that's going to solve some of these problems. He thinks that's going to bring everyone back. It's horrible, but it's written so well that you understand this guy is just psychologically screwed up. The war has destroyed him. There is so much mayhem and awfulness. Okay, but one of the children is sexually assaulted by a couple of Polish men in the woods, and this child is Gretel. It's one of our main characters. She is out in the woods. She's in an area she swore she wouldn't go to. She promised Telek she wouldn't go into this area. She goes into that area and she's alone. It's wintertime, and these two men discover her, and they go through her pockets to see if she's got anything of value, and they ask, are you alone? Because if there's someone with you, that might be dangerous. And she doesn't know how to respond to that, because if she says she's alone, that's dangerous. If she says there's someone with her and then they figure out that's a lie, then she'll be in trouble for lying. She's only like 10 or 12 years old. Okay. She's a child. And they both sexually assault her. And Luis describes this. She spells it out. And I was horrified by this. Like I said earlier, this is not a book for a young adult. A young adult should not be reading this. So we get this scene, and it destroys Gretel's mind, as it should, as it would. We do have the stepmother discovering this happen. The stepmother has fallen in with a group of partisans, and they are in the area of this village. So they're near the area where the forest is, and the stepmother discovers this happening, and she recognizes her stepdaughter, and she shoots the men, thank God. But one of the men, there's two of them, one of them gets a shot off and kills the stepmother. So the two men die, yay, but the stepmother dies too. But Gretel is she's already destroyed. Her mind is destroyed. She is lost to what has just happened She doesn't realize that the stepmother is lying in the snow, dying near her. All she knows is that, okay, the pain has just stopped and the sky is blue. And she's imagining her grandfather bringing her oranges. Luckily, Telik comes along and finds her there in the cold, freezing, and gets her back to Magda, and they get her cleaned up, but her mind is gone. Her mind is gone. Now, she was one of the pristine children that the Oberfuhrer was interested in. Okay, but now her mind is gone. She's a crazy person in their eyes. Everyone thinks she's crazy. Crazy people get shot. Crazy people don't make it. The Oberfuhrer will shoot and kill her. So they have to hide the fact that she's lost her mind. It's a dark, depressing book of despair. Okay. Now we do have, as I shared with you about the scene about the oven, Magda gets taken away by the Oberfuhrer. She's taken to a concentration camp in Poland. She is taken to a gas chamber and she is killed. She dies. It's awful. And that is described in details that are horrifying, but it's written so well that you feel it. You are there with her. You despair with her and the others around her. It's horrifying. The two kids are in the oven, but Magda was able to unlatch that thing before they pulled her away. So the kids get out of the oven after everyone leaves. The house is burning down around them. They get out, they run away. The Oberfuhrer chases them. I mean, the Nazis have this just overwhelming, horrifying need to track down these two children because they are Jewish and destroy them. It's alarming, but we see it, we watch it happen. And the book is so well written. I mean, kudos to Louise Murphy for writing something that was that moving and that disturbing. What happens is they see a battle taking place on a field, and that battle is so dangerous to Hansel. It presents such a threat to Hansel that Gretel pops out of this mania that she's been in. She pops out of this like psychological fugue that she's been in, and she goes to save her brother. She suddenly realizes, oh my gosh, I must save my younger brother. And she pops out of this basically fugue that she's been in, and she protects him. She's able to protect her brother. So there is this moment of coming back to herself for Gretel. She comes back to herself. She's able to help her brother. They're able to get back to the ghetto where they originally lived. Back there, the Oberfuhrer is there. Luckily, the partisans are there, and they are able to destroy the Oberfuhrer, which is great, or send him off to a prison. He gets taken care of. All right. And our two children go into a food pantry, an area where they are giving away food. They go into an area where their father, the mechanic, is there, and he is ladling out soup, and he sees his children, and they see him, and it's like, oh my God, how lucky are we? And there's this moment at the end of the book, this moment of joyous hope, because these two children and their father are reunited in the ghetto where they began. After this book of despair and horror and depression and anger and hate and murder, after all the maiming and harm that took place in this book, to have this moment where the family comes back together, the dad and the two kids, it was wonderful. It was a relief that they found each other at the end of this book. I was so glad that there was that. I mean, it was a happy ending of sorts. I mean, as happy as it could be, right? It was a happy ending that they found each other and they were able to be together again. And the two kids, they don't remember their names, but their father does. And he says their names to them. Okay, but Louise Murphy, bless her heart, she doesn't tell us the names. And I am so glad that she didn't. I think it would have ruined the story. I think it would have ruined it if she had revealed their real identities, because we're not supposed to know their identities. They hide, right? So here's the very ending of the book. Let's see. I will help you remember, her father said. I can't remember either. What can't you remember, my son? This stepmother told me that I'm Hansel. But who was I before? Gretel got better, but she won't say our names. Gretel tried to remember her real name. She had dreamed about it so many times since the wheat field, but she couldn't pull the name out of her dreams and speak it. The name had stayed gone, as if it were hiding from her, and her brother's name was gone too. The man looked down at the faces of his children, so thin, so much older looking in the ravaged tightness of their skin. They looked back at him, heads tilted up and eyes shining, their lips half open, both of them waiting to hear their names. He spoke each name slowly, quietly, the crowd of workers that had gathered around the three catching up the sounds and echoing the names in whispers. He spoke their names over and over and watched these gifts brought out of darkness, these bits of flesh, this blood of his blood and bone of his bone, his children, begin to smile as they became once again themselves.